Alright students, we are going to start with a new chapter, nationalism in Europe, and that's basically the first chapter that you have for CBSE in history. So one second. Okay, so that's basically the first chapter that you have in history, and it's one of the very important chapters. The reason why it is very important is because in the reduced pattern of your syllabus for this current year, nothing has been deducted from this syllabus. So each and every line out here in this syllabus and text in your books is important. Okay, so nothing has been deduced from this syllabus. It's considered as one of the most important chapters in your SST in history. So we will start off with this chapter. Before we start off, we need to understand certain basics about this chapter. The rise of nationalism in Europe. So why are we trying to understand nationalism in the context of Europe? So understand this concept. Like, nationalism means what? Nationalism means concerned with a nation. Okay, so the word itself is there. It is a feeling which is concerned with a nation. Nationalism means, we have already defined what is nationalism. It is a political and socio-economic philosophy that promotes the interest of a nation as a whole. So it's a complicated definition, but what we mean here is nationalistic feelings, nationalism, your inclination towards your nation. So for example, when you are in US and all of a sudden you see that the national anthem of India is being played, so you immediately get connected to it, right? Because that's something concerning your nation. Even if you are out of the boundaries of India, you will always feel those nationalistic feelings. For example, if you see the tricolor somewhere outside India, even then you will get connected to it. So these are symbols, these are certain things that we are already associated with. Nationalism means your feelings towards your nation. Okay, so nationalism, so if it is concerned with a feeling towards one own nation, why are we talking about an entire continent? Okay, here we are referring to Europe as a continent. If we were talking about France or Italy or Germany and the nationalism there, then it could be understood. So why are we correlating nationalism to an entire continent? Ideally, nationalism as a concept should be correlated to the nation, but here it is getting correlated to the entire continent. Why? Because at that point of time, it marked the basically it is marking the dissociation. It is marking it is a time period in which nationalistic feelings amongst all European nations arose. Okay, so people along all the European countries, there was a nationalistic feeling which developed along all of them. All right, so that's how it transpired, and this spread like a wildfire. This spread like a wildfire means this nationalistic feelings and whatever changes happened at that point of time, the de-establishment of the monarchical rule, the establishment of democracy, all these changes that were taking place in almost all European countries were actually being transpired. These feelings, these nationalistic feelings actually got transpired to all the countries of the world, including India. And that's the reason it is important to understand what was the nationalism that was happening in Europe, because that is connected to something that was happening across all the countries of the globe. Okay, so if we divide this chapter, so nationalism basically it is a political and socio-economic philosophy. Okay, it is concerned with something political, which means that the political boundaries, the political structure, whether it is a monarchical rule, whether it is dictatorship, whether it is communism, whether it is whether it is democracy, all these things. So the political structure of a particular nation and the socio-economic philosophy. What is the socio-economic philosophy? How are the people connected to each other? What is the social economic philosophy? How is the society structured? How is the economic background of a particular country? All of this comes under nationalism. Okay, generally people feel that nationalism is something which is concerned with nationalistic emotions, your patriotism towards the country. No, patriotism is a different feeling altogether. Nationalism is something which is actually having a rational approach. Okay, patriotism is your feelings towards the country. However, nationalism is a political and socio-economic philosophy that promotes the interest of a nation as a whole. Okay, so it is not confined to a particular community or a sect of people. It is confined to the entire nation. all the people of the nation, their interests are taken into consideration when we talk about nationalism. For example, when I talk about nationalism in India, okay, so I would not be excluding a particular community from India. Their national interest will also be included. Okay, so national interest of everyone is inclusive in this concept of nationalism. So it evolved in Europe along during the 19th century. So this nationalism feeling evolved in Europe in the 19th century. Now when we are studying this chapter, we are going to study it in 4 parts. Okay, first is the rise of nationalism in Europe. We will see how the nationalism as a concept rose in the entire continent of Europe, and the age of revolution, which is basically from 1830 to 1848, and the unification of Germany and Italy. Okay, so how Germany and Italy got united. Okay, nation states. Okay, what were the nation states? Unification of Italy, Germany and Britain. Okay, so this is basically unification of Italy, Germany and Britain. Okay, visualizing the nation, that is nationalism and imperialism. So visualizing the nation and nationalism and imperialism. So these are certain concepts that we have for nationalism. Okay, and this is how we are going to study the chapter. Questions come from these 4 sections of the chapter, and nothing of these 4 sections has been omitted in your new syllabus, which was restructured during this epidemic. Okay, so nothing has been excluded from this chapter. So we are going to evolve this entire chapter in bits and pieces, and we'll study in this concept. Okay, so you can take a snapshot of the same while continue with the slides.
Okay, so Frederic Soreau was a French artist who in 1848 prepared a series of 4 prints visualizing his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics. The distinct feature of these prints were the representations of men's, nations and allegories. In this painting, French artist visualizes his dream of a world made up of democratic and social republics as he called them. It shows people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes marching in a long train offering homage to the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty in Frederic Soreau's painting shows the people of Europe and America marching towards the Statue of Liberty and paying homage to it. Liberty is personified as a female figure which holds the charter rights in one hand and torch in another. So in Soreau's utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations identified through their flags and national costumes. Soreau created the image to unify the disintegrated states into a nation state under a democratic constitution. So Frederic Soreau, the French artist, prepared a series of 4 prints. The first print of the series shows the people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes, marching in a long train, these offering homage to the Statue of Liberty as they pass by it. Second print is that of allegory of liberty in female figure, holding torch of enlightenment in one and charter of rights of man on the other. The third print is that of shattered remains of the symbols of absolutist institutions. Okay, so the absolutist institutions or the monarchical institutions have been completely shattered. The fourth print refers to the utopian vision in which the peoples of the world are shown marching together on the path of development. It is a vision of world peace and prosperity.
Alright, so we are going to continue. Now, what are the key features of the nationalist feelings that had developed in Europe? We had discussed about a painting that was there, and how it, how a painter basically depicted the actual feelings of the people during that period of time. Okay, now the concept of nationalism emerged in Europe during the 19th century. So the concept of nationalism, the people started getting united with nationalistic feelings towards their country, and a lot of changes started happening, okay, simultaneously. So the concept of nationalism emerged in Europe during the 19th century. Nationalism emerged as a force which brought about sweeping changes, okay, as a force which brought about sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe, okay. So this brought about sweeping changes, which means that these were very radical and very strong changes that were brought up in the political system as well as in the mindset of the people, okay. It changed the entire dynamics of the ruling world, of the country itself, of how the country is being governed and ruled, okay. So all these European countries which were governed and ruled in a particular way, the entire thing changed, okay. So it brought about sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe. It marked the downfall of feudalism. As we have understood in the previous chapters, there is something called as feudalism. Now what does feudalism mean? You have studied it in the 9th standard, that there was these landlords who were there in the French system, especially whosoever is powerful takes the land, okay. So feudalism means that. So it's a kind of the one who is more, it's more or less a jungle rule, okay. Who is powerful, the land belongs to him. So it marked the downfall of feudalism. So by and large, feudalism started to disappear, because feudalism basically correlates to anarchy and disorder, okay. Anarchy and disorder. Feudalism is basically a system that was there in France, in which the king, so the size of the empire had become so large that he used to appoint feudal lords to collect revenue, to manage the affairs of that particular state and all that, okay. So feudal lords emerged, and these feudal lords kept on fighting amongst each other. There was a lot of disorder and anarchy, and common people used to lose their lives, their land, their property, their relatives, okay. So the common people had to pay a heavy price due to this feudalism. So this marked the downfall of feudalism. Feudalism started to disappear, and the beginning of Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. A new structure of society emerged, a new predominant ruling started. So this was basically rebirth, okay. The end result of these changes was the emergence of nation state. Now what do you mean by nation state? A particular nation which has its own boundaries, where there is a definite form of governance, okay, that is called nation state, okay. In the previous times, boundaries were not demarked, and the nations were different. Whosoever conquered the nation became the ruler. So there was a lot of anarchy and disorder. There was no system and form of government as well. Just as today we have what is India, what is Pakistan, what is Great Britain, we have internal disputes. Disputes have not resolved. However, in international boundaries, we know which nation belongs where, okay. So there is a boundary which is already there, okay. So these boundaries have been decided by international treaties and agreements, whatever have happened, okay. So the end result of these changes was the emergence of nation state in the place of multinational dynastic empires. So in place of multinational dynastic empires, the nation states emerged, okay. So there were previously multinational dynastic empires. Multinational dynastic empires means what? For example, if you look in India, okay, we had the Maratha Empire, we had the Mughal Empire, then we had the Nawab of Oudh, and there were so many dynastical empires that the entire country was divided into. So the people of India actually were never able to come together for a common cause, because their identities kept on fluctuating. We will learn as to how identity impacts, what is collective identity, and how it emerged during this period, okay. So these were things that were, so the entire country used to be divided into multinational dynastical empires. Dynastical empires, which means that a king's son becomes the king, and so on and so forth. It's not democracy, okay. So the people don't elect their leaders, they don't get to choose their leaders are predestined, okay. So the concepts of liberty, equality and fraternity, which are basically the concepts of democracy and nationalism, dominated the social and political scene of Europe in the 19th century. So during that particular period, all these things dominated the political situation of Europe, the political thinking of Europe, the social structure of Europe. So there was a huge change that was taking simultaneously in the entire nation of, or the entire continent of Europe, and that's precisely what we are going to study and focus in this chapter, okay. Okay, so some more features about what was the characteristics of the nationalism which was developing in Europe. So for a long period of time, the people in Europe basically felt the concept of a modern state. Okay, there were intellectuals who were involved, there were writers who were there were painters who were there, as we saw how painting influenced the mindset, how writings of different people influenced the mindset. There were intellectuals who were developing, and they constantly felt that there is a need for a centralized power, which means that a nation cannot be divided into multiple dynasties, because of which there is always a conflict, and because of which there never develops a collective identity of people, because of which the nation never unites for a common cause, and because of which it becomes easy for an enemy to easily defeat them. Okay, so for a long period of time it was felt in Europe amongst different communities that the concept of a modern state in which a centralized power exercised a sovereign control over a clearly defined territory, that's called a nation state. Okay, clearly defined territory, sovereign control. So there would be a centralized power which will be controlling a clearly defined nation, a nation which is defined in terms of territorial boundaries. Okay, was developing. This was something that was developing as a concept for a very long period of time, and that's what was the background of the nationalistic movement that happened in Europe. Okay, so for a long period of time the people of Europe felt that every country should have a centralized power in which it will be protecting the interest of all the nation, of all the citizens of the country, irrespective of the caste, color, creed, whatever. Okay, so that was a feeling, that was a sense that was developing, and this was depicted in the works of the artisans, the work of the artists, the work of writers, the philosophers, etc. So everyone had their own share of thought in this thing. Okay, so nation state, what is basically a nation state? Majority of the citizens and not only the rulers came to develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. So a nation state basically, for examples, before India emerged as a country, as a nation, okay, it was divided into the Maratha Empire, the Mughal Empire, the Nawab of Oudh, and all these were princely states which was divided into. So once India, the concept of entire India developed, okay, so the entire India can now, every Indian can now correlate to the entire country, not only to the specific region of where he or she belongs, but she is an Indian, he or she is an Indian, we belong to the entire country. Okay, that's the feeling of nationalism. So nation state means majority of the citizens and not only the rulers can actually develop a sense of common identity. I am an Indian first, and after that I belong to a particular state or maybe a particular region. Okay, but at the first place I am an Indian. Okay, so majority of the citizens came to develop a sense of common identity and shared history or descent. Okay, shared history or descent means we basically shared the history and the descent from where we are developing, from where we have evolved. Okay, so all Indians have a common evolution. Okay, we have a common cultural background, a common environmental background. Okay, so all this is basically descent from where we are all developing. So all Indians look alike irrespective of their caste, color, creed, whatever. Okay, so they almost look alike because of their cultural background or their common descent. Okay, so that's how the entire nation unites. This was the concept of nationalism which spread like a wildfire during those times. Okay, and this was not only confined to the boundaries of Europe itself, but to the entire world. And that's the reason it becomes important to understand history in the context of nationalism that was developing in Europe. Okay, so it's a very important part, and from here on we will now look into the different segments of the development. Okay, till now we have considered as to what were the reasons for which the development was happening and what was the background of this nationalism, or what is nation state or what is nationalism. And now we will study it in bits and parts, bits and pieces as to how it actually developed. Okay. Okay, so we will continue with the French Revolution out here. So this topic is basically about nationalism in Europe, and when we talk about nationalism in Europe, we actually are concerned with nationalism that was there in France. Okay, so in the entire Europe we are going to study the context of nationalism, but we'll start with France as a whole. Why? Because the French Revolution was the remarkable feature of, without studying the French Revolution, the study of rise in nationalism in Europe is almost incomplete. Okay, I would say that this is almost incomplete. Okay, so the study of nationalism in Europe is of it primarily includes the study of nationalism in France. Okay, so we have studied this in the 9th standard, how the nation of France evolved, how there were, you know, different sects of the society, like there was this sect of noblemen, then there were clergymen, then there was the royal family, okay, then there was the common people. Okay, so this was basically the entire structure of the society at that point of time, and by and large it started getting resolved. Okay, so the monarchical rule, which was very much predominant, okay, and it was a torturous rule because the common people, the peasants, the workers, the farmers, they had to pay a very big price due to the constant torture or constant subjugation by the noblemen or the clergymen. Okay, so till 1789 France was under absolute monarchy. So what do we mean by absolute monarchy? Absolute monarchy means that there was the king's rule. Okay, so the king, his royal family, and the noblemen and the clergymen were actually dominating the French Empire. Okay, so till 1789 France was under absolute monarchy. Okay, nation, sense of collective identity. Now after this revolution, what happens is that when the French Revolution started in 1789, the sense of collective identity started developing amongst people. Now what is collective identity? See, when people associate themselves to a particular region, to a particular country, that is called collective identity. Okay, so nation is basically sense of collective identity. This collective identity started developing in the nation. Okay, so the people started uniting for a common cause, that is called collective identity. When you have people who are uniting for a common cause, that is called collective identity. So the French Revolution started in 1789 and was an influential event. It was a very influential event that marked the age of revolutions in Europe. Okay, so it is considered as one of the primary events that had happened, which revolutionized the entire thinking of people around the globe and primarily in Europe. Okay, the major outcome of the revolution was the formation of constitutional monarchy. The constitutional monarchy. Okay, now monarchy was there before the revolution and the monarchy was there after the revolution as well. However, before the revolution it was absolute monarchy, and after the revolution it was constitutional monarchy. So remarkable reduction. Now what happened is that the monarchy still prevailed in France. However, there was almost 360-degree changes to it. Okay, so because of which the feudal privileges that were enjoyed by the feudal lords, the ones who were appointed by the royal king to look after certain regions, the feudal lords and the royal privileges, they decreased to a large extent. Okay, so this was a remarkable event that happened. Okay, and after 1789 the absolute monarchy changed into constitutional monarchy. It paved the way for the achievement of bigger goals of national identity. This was basically a way in which national identity and national pride was established, and this is called nationalism. This is the root of nationalism. Nationalism means national pride and national identity. So this is the basic structure of nationalism, and that's how the feeling of nationalism, the feeling of collective identity, the feeling of belongingness to the nation, the feeling that this nation can be, this nation is for the common people and not just for the royal families or the noblemen or the clergymen. That's how the entire context of the rule changed. Okay, so this is something that spread across Europe, and that's the reason when we study the feeling of or rather the nationalism in Europe, France is the first country that we are actually studying. Okay, because the major changes were brought about in France. Okay, clear? So you can take a snapshot of the same. Okay, so we are going to study how the French Revolution, we covered certain aspects of the French Revolution in the previous slide. We are going to cover the remaining aspects out here. Okay, so the revolution transferred the sovereignty from the monarch to the people. So now the sovereignty means the ruling part. Okay, now it is transferred from the monarch. The monarch is, or the kings were now no longer whole and soul of the entire country. Okay, it was slowly transpiring into democracy. Okay, but the monarchical rule was abolished, more or less abolished. The kings were there, but they were not in the same way functioning as they used to earlier. Okay, so it was transferred from the monarch to the people. Now the people influence on the governance increased. Previously, as we have studied in the 9th standard, if you have studied the French Revolution part in the 9th standard, you will recall that there was a revolution that happened, and there were a lot of things that changed the dynamics of the entire ruling system. Okay, so the monarchical rule was now transferred to the people. Now people were actively involved in the politics of the nation, in the setup of the nation, in the entire decision making process. So they were the ones who were collectively involved, and that's what had given the collective identity to the people. Collective identity means when the identity for the people becomes common. Okay, so the ideas of la patrie and the la citoyenne, these are basically French words, French phrases. This means the fatherland, and la citoyenne means the citizen. Okay, were adopted. So these were the ideas which were basically adopted. So the ideas of la patrie and the la citoyenne were adopted. The Estates Generals were rearmed the National Assembly, which was elected by the body of active citizens. So the Estates General was rearmed by the National Assembly. This National Assembly was basically selected by the body of active citizens. So these active citizens basically reformed the National Assembly. Okay, so you see the active participation involved. French armies moved into, now the French armies now moved into the remaining nations which were there in European country and which were facing the same problem as the French or the France itself faced a while ago, before 1798. So French armies moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland and Italy in the 1790s with the promise of liberating the people from their despotic rulers. So these rulers were basically very selfish rulers. Over a period of time, they knew that nothing is going to happen, and hence they get become selfish. Okay, so we'll take it from there. You can take a snapshot of the same. Okay, so just to elaborate on what we have studied about the French Revolution. Okay, so we have already studied French Revolution in the 9th standard in detail. However, there are certain aspects that we need to cover in this chapter as well, because without understanding the French Revolution or the finer aspects of French Revolution, we cannot actually understand how nationalism in Europe, the continent itself, developed. Okay, so nation, there was a sense of collective identity which had developed. Okay, we talked about this in the earlier slide, which is also known as la patrie and la citoyenne. La patrie basically means fatherland. See, just as in India we say Bharat Mata. Okay, so we motherland. Okay, basically India is correlated to motherland. In France it is collectively known as fatherland. La patrie means fatherland. Okay, so this is basically correlated to fatherland. Your feelings towards your own motherland, or your feelings towards your own fatherland, in the same way, it's just a gender thing that is there. Okay, sense of collective identity, that is la patrie, and la citoyenne, basically it is your citizens. La citoyenne means citizens land. Okay, so France is the land of citizens, or the people of France are connected to their fatherland. These were the certain identities which were developed. Okay, and these were known as collective identities. Okay, the monarchical rule always made it sure wherever it was. Okay, whether it was in India or whether it was in France or whether it was in any other country, the monarchical rule always made sure that the people never unite, and because their union itself will be a problem. Okay, so that's how the monarchical rule was. It never made sure that the people unite, and they always made sure that the people are divided by in some form or shape, or Okay, so as soon as the monarchical rule was de-established or outthrown, so these things developed. Okay, the new French flag was made. Okay, the new French flag was made. Again, as I say, see how do these things promote nationalism. So if you are, let's say, in a foreign country and you happen to see the Indian flag, you will immediately get connected to your country. That's the nationalist feelings that we have. If you happen to hear the national anthem, the same high regard that you will have while you are in India, you will get the same feelings out there in a different country as well. So these are things, the national flag, the national anthem, these are things which are basically which basically connect the fellow citizens to their own country. and that's how the idea of national flag or the new French flag was developed. Okay, so these are certain triggers which instigated nationalism, okay, in the citizens of France. So formation of National Assembly. So we know that there were 3 states, okay, the first state, the second state, and the third state in France when the monarchical rule was prevalent before 1798. Okay, so these 3 states were the noblemen, the common people, and the clergymen. So these were the 3 states that the France country was divided into. However, these 3 states were overthrown and the National Assembly took over. The National Assembly was formed, which was basically formed by the people of France. Okay, and the National Assembly took over. Okay, some more changes. Internal custom duties were abolished. So there were a lot of custom duties which were more or less a burden to the common people of France. They were abolished. Uniform weights and measurements were set up. Okay, uniform weights and measurements. See, when you look into an economy, you have to actually look at it in both the aspects, a macro aspect and a micro aspect. Okay, so that's basically how economics is divided. So economy of a country is divided. When we talk about the micro aspects, okay, so that the rights of people are not violated, it's very essential that the units that you are selecting to weigh things to give people, they should be standardized. Okay, I cannot have a stone and I am sitting in a shop and I am giving people by weighing it in the stone. The stone is as per my weight. Okay, so there has to be a government certified weight which will be kept, a 1 kg of iron or 2 kg of iron, which could be used to give to transact business. Okay, so uniform weights and measurements was a very I would say innovative step in order to stabilize the economy. Till the time the economy of a country is not stabilized, it's very difficult to stabilize the people and it's very difficult to unite the people as well. Okay, so it's very important that uniform weights and measurements. So this is a basically micro step in economy. Okay, but it will have major impacts in economy. Okay, so these were things that were taken. New oaths were taken and new hymns were composed. Okay, so new oaths were taken and new hymns were composed. See, you must have seen when we get recruited to an army or when we get recruited to the police department, we take oaths, right? Or when even to the medical department, there is a certain amount of responsibility that you have towards your occupation, and this occupation is connected to the citizens of the country. So there is a certain amount of responsibility that you have to display till the time you are basically involved in that job. So in the same way, we have a responsibility towards the country. So in order to reiterate our responsibility towards the country and in order to trigger the spirits of nationalism, new oaths were taken and new hymns were composed. Hymns are basically songs, a sort of religious songs, okay, where these were composed. So all this basically united the people of India. If you look into India, united the people of France. If you look into India, the same thing was composed by Gandhi. He composed a lot of hymns like Vaishnava Jana, and a lot of hymns were composed, which basically the purpose of him singing these songs was to unite the people of India, because people had for a long period of time suffered under various rulers and they had almost lost their identity. So that's the reason he was trying to unite the people by singing these hymns and praises in the form of various bhajans that he had done. Okay, a centralized administrative system was set up. A centralized system was set up. There was a center which was monitoring everything. French language was promoted in place of regional dialects. Okay, so they thought that since we need to unite people on a common basis, the common basis should be French language. Okay, so there were regional dialects. There are regional dialects in every country, and France was no exception. There were regional dialects in France as well. But instead of promoting regional dialects, they came up to one language, that is French, so that the people are more or less inclined towards one language, one nation. That's how it was. Okay, one centralized system, one language, one nation. That's how they were transforming the entire nationalism in France. The feeling of nationalism spread in countries. Obviously, we saw in the earlier slide how the French armies marched and spread the feelings in the nearby countries of Switzerland, Holland, Belgium, and Italy as well. Okay, and one of the pioneers of this motion was Napoleon. We are going to study about Napoleon in the next slide. Okay, Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the pioneers in this movement. Okay, so what had happened in France basically, if you see, this is something that we have already studied. Louis XVI was overthrown, and there was a transformation. The Jacobin Club took over. The Jacobin Club took over. After that, the Directory took over, and after that, Napoleon took over. Okay, so there was again a transition from monarchy to monarchy. Okay, he was again a dictator as well, or I would say he was again a ruler as well, with a difference. Okay, he was not an absolute monarch, but still he was a ruler. Okay, so the monarchy came back again with the rise of Napoleon. So Louis XVI, he lost, and then the Jacobin Club took over, and then the Jacobin Club handed over to the Directory, and the Directory handed over to the King Napoleon. And Napoleon was the person who actually spread all these concepts of nationalism to different parts of the continent of Europe, let's say to countries like Switzerland, Holland, Belgium and Italy. So that's a little brief about the process of nationalism in France, and most of it has been covered in the 9th standard itself. We were just going to fine tune certain aspects of how Napoleon did it, and we are going to study it in further context of the entire movement. Okay, you can take a snapshot of the same. Okay, so we are going to now understand how Napoleon Bonaparte actually rose up in the ranks, and how he became the dictator of France. The reason why we need to understand Napoleon Bonaparte's rise is because although he was a dictator, and finally at one point of time he lost, but then he was influential in bringing not only in France but across entire Europe certain reforms. Okay, and these reforms were accepted by all the governments which were formed later on. Okay, so somehow, in spite of being a dictator, he laid down the foundations of democracy. Okay, that's a very contradictory thing that we are going to study. A dictator laying the foundations of democracy. Okay, generally dictatorship is when the ruler is very adamant about his or her own policies, and when he runs the country by his or her own will. But here a different thing happened. Okay, so we need to understand what was the Napoleon Code and why it emerged, and how was the journey of Napoleon across France and in the neighboring countries as well. Okay, so Napoleon Bonaparte, he was basically from 1769 to 1821. Okay, he ruled France from 1719 to 1815. Napoleon Bonaparte was a ruler of France. Okay, this was his time. He basically lost in a war, the Battle of Waterloo, and he was sent into exile. Okay, so there were people who welcomed Napoleon, and quite ironically, these were the same people who demolished him. Okay, so the people who were very happy to welcome Napoleon as their ruler were the ones who actually demolished him at a later part of his life. Okay, so unfortunately, his things became a little haywire at a later end or later part of his life or his rule. Okay, so he assumed absolute power in 1799 by becoming the first consul. Now what happened is, we all have seen that Louis XVI lost. Okay, he was overthrown by the Jacobin Club. So the Jacobin Club, Robert Speer, we all have studied about him. Robert Speer, he became the leader, but he was also executed, and then it transformed into Directory. So this Directory was basically a 5-membered body, Okay, this Directory was a 5-membered body. So in France, after the execution of Louis XVI, Jacobin Club took over and Robert Speer basically took over, but he was also executed, and after that a 5-member team called the Directory was formed. But we know that in human beings it's very rational, or it's very obvious that 5 members will have their own perspectives. So there was always a difference of opinion amongst these 5 people, and because of which the government was not managed as it should be. The government was not effectively managed as it should have been, and hence Napoleon took the advantage of this situation. He took the advantage, and at that point of time he was the leader of the military. Okay, he was the leader of the army, and he was the general of the army basically, and he took over as the dictator of France. So by being the general of his army, he took over as the dictator of France. He took over as the dictator of France. Okay, so when he took over as the dictator of France, okay, he started capturing the nearby countries, let's say Belgium, Italy. Okay, so he started capturing all these countries. Okay, so there was a huge empire that was created. And why did he start capturing these countries? Because these countries welcomed Napoleon. Napoleon introduced a lot of reforms, and that's when we need to understand what was the Napoleon Code. So after he took over, he introduced the Civil Code in 1804, and that was also known as the Napoleon Code. So he was basically a leader with a vision. He just didn't become a leader like anything. Okay, he was a leader who had a vision in his mind, and he started executing that vision, and that vision was the Napoleon Code. It is also commonly known as the Napoleon Code. So he introduced the Civil Code in 1804, and this Civil Code became so famous that the nearby countries wanted Napoleon as their leader. Okay, that's the reason he was easily able to conquer countries like Belgium, Holland, okay, all these nearby countries, Switzerland, all these nearby countries that were very close to France, since Europe is a clustered community. Okay, so he was able to conquer these countries because the people there supported his vision. Okay, he had, although he was a dictator, but he wanted the welfare of people somehow. Okay, and that was something that was taken by people very positively. So Napoleon became the dictator. However, he destroyed democracy. So obviously, when you become a dictator, you destroy democracy. But he made some but he made the administration more efficient. Okay, this is basically an ironical thing. Generally, we have seen in histories of nations that whenever you see dictatorship arising or dictators arising, they generally kill the democratic process. But here, a different thing altogether happened. Napoleon became the ruler, the dictator, but he envisaged, or he basically inculcated all those values of democracy. Okay, he laid the foundation for democracy, I would say. Okay, so he was a very efficient ruler, so committed ruler, and he brought in a lot of reforms. So Napoleon was one of the very committed rulers. Okay, and they generally say that Napoleon was the modernizer of, correctly in some books and some thought processes, he is known as the modernizer of Europe. Okay, he was the person who modernized the way of thinking. Okay, so how? By implementing this Napoleon Code. So we'll understand certain aspects of the Napoleon Code. Okay, so what were these aspects which made him an efficient ruler and his system or administration more efficient? Okay, so this code abolished all privileges based on birth and established equality before law. Okay, so we know that in France in particular there were three states, and the people of these states, whether they were noblemen or they were clergymen or they were common peasants, common people, workers, they all considered their births to be the way in which they are segregated in the society. So if I am born as a peasant, I will accept that my job is to work for other people, my job is to do labor, my job is to do all that things that a peasant or a worker or a farmer does. Okay, if I am a clergyman, I am involved with priests and I have a reputed position in the society, I have lands with me, I have revenue coming in. If I belong to the noblemen, then I have a different lifestyle. So the lifestyle that people had was basically on the basis of their birth, in which community they are being born, whether they belong to the noblemen or whether they belong to the clergymen or they belong to the peasants or the workers. So France was divided into three states, and these three states were based on the births. It was not something that you acquire, it was something that was given to you by the birth that you are getting in any of these communities, okay, in any of these estates. So Napoleon said that there will be no birthrights as such, okay, and he established equality before law. So everyone would be equal before law. Okay, so see, it is not possible to have everyone equal before law. Even if I say in a democracy, so let's say if I am driving and I have violated some driving rules, I have maybe I have ignored a signal and just crossed over. so I would be fined. Okay, now if I happen to be somebody influential in the bureaucracy or maybe in the political system, then I might get away. Okay, so does democracy ensure that everything is equal or people are equal? No, not always. Okay, see, the execution is a little different. Okay, so it's not necessary that the execution will be intact. Okay, so at times the execution is different. Okay, so the same thing happens here, although the principles of democracy are the same. So what he said was that everybody was equal before law. So was it implemented to the T? Maybe there would be glitches, but still this concept itself was not there previously. So everyone considered their birthright to be whatever rights or privileges they were enjoying. They connected it to their birth in that particular state. But Napoleon was the first person who challenged this, and he reformed it entirely. And he said there would be no birthrights as such. Okay, and he established everyone as equal before law. Okay, so what were the other things according to this code? The feudal system was abolished. Feudal system, as we all know, the feudal system basically means these lords, the feudal lords who were appointed by the rulers, since France was a huge country. So in order to effectively manage, these were feudal lords that were appointed by the kings, and these feudal lords were given a lot of powers. They were almost the kings of the regions. Okay, so we can call them as miniature kings. They had all the rights to collect the revenue as much as they want, to torture people, to punish people. So all of this was entirely on the feudal lords, and there was a lot of riffle between the feudal lords themselves. They fought a lot amongst themselves, and the fight, the result, the consequences of these fights had to be borne by the common people. Okay, so the feudal system was abolished. Okay, serfdom and manorial dues. What is serfdom? Basically, you say when a certain amount of peasants or workers are working under me, that is called serfdom. So I am responsible for those peasants. It's up to me how I pay them, when I pay them, and how much I pay them. Okay, so that is called serfdom. That was the manorial dues. So we have seen in India as well, during the zamindari system, there were a lot of dues that were imposed on the farmers, and they were just not able to come out of the credit that was extended. The credit was hardly some amount of money, but the paying back was so huge that people used to lose their way. So farmers used to work their entire life for certain zamindars, and not only their entire life, but their sons used to work for them, their sons used to work for them. So generation after generation, they were imposed these strict rules because they know that they don't have the money. Okay, so these were manorial dues. So the system was designed in such a way that these dues just never seemed to end. Okay, so these manorial dues which were there on poor farmers and peasants, they were all called off. Okay, so all of this was abolished. So this was the corruption in the system which was taken care of by Napoleon. So these were certain very good moves that Napoleon made, and because of which he got noticed around Europe. Okay, so people started looking at him like a Masiha, like a person who will liberate them of all their miseries. Okay, so obviously it becomes very easy for a person who is considered as a Masiha or a liberator of their miseries to capture another country, because people are already by his side. Okay, so that's what caused the major expansion that Napoleon made. And when he was expanding the French Empire or to all these countries, he was imposing the same Napoleon code on all these countries. Okay, so guild restrictions were removed. Now what is guild restrictions? Now guild restrictions, see, understand this. Okay, in the French community, these three states were so powerful that they hardly allowed the guilds to actually mingle with each other. I am just giving an example. For example, if let's say we have a business community in a particular place, okay, all the shop owners, if they are all united, they will have a common way of bargaining for things. They will have a strength of their own as a trade union. We have heard about these trade unions. Okay, so these are good things that can be there in the business community, which was not allowed previously. So all of them were solo players. no guilt was built. So all these restrictions which were there for the business community to mingle with each other and to form associations and to broaden the horizon and to ensure that business is run more smoothly so that one is not impacting the other. So these things were not there, and Napoleon was sharp in looking at these things. He knew that whatever may be the case, business has to increase. Okay, the business part is something that has to be taken care of. Until unless there is business, until unless there is generation of money, until unless people are earning money, they will not be able to get rid of their miseries, no matter how much a good leader you are. Okay, so Napoleon was smart in acknowledging this, and he removed all these restrictions that were imposed on the business community, not to mingle with each other, not to form associations and all. Okay, he encouraged transport and communication. Okay, the transport and communication was improved. He was the first person to make this major change. Okay, this was a major change. Weights and measurements were standardized. Okay, see, as I said in the earlier slide, in economy there is something called as macroeconomics and there is something called as microeconomics. Microeconomics means the economics of a household. Okay, what we purchase, what we earn, where we spend the money, that's called microeconomics. And macroeconomics has a broader horizon. For example, how the economics of a region is, or how the economics of a country is, or how the economics of the world is. Okay, so microeconomics starts at the very primary level, and that's what makes the macroeconomics. Okay, you cannot build a nation until unless you ensure the household expenses income is correct. Okay, so that is something that is very much essential in nation building, which Napoleon was smart to analyze. And one of the major things at that point of time was weights and measurements. Weights and measurements were not standardized, because of which merchants can exploit people. There was a lot of exploitation. For example, if I say this chalk, okay, if you give me this piece, so this piece of chalk is what you will get for 1 kg of rice. Okay, so when I say 1 kg of rice, okay, it automatically translates in your mind, because you can correlate to the weight. Today you must have all gone to various malls, or maybe various local shop owners to purchase things every now and then. And when you purchase a liter of milk, or when you purchase a kg of sugar, so these are things which you can very much correlate to, because you are used to those weights and systems. How about this? If let's say instead of a kg of iron that is generally kept, we keep a stone. Now who the hell knows what does the stone weighs, how much does the stone weigh? So when you don't use standardized weight, you cannot challenge things, because of which people get exploited. It's the common people who get exploited. Okay, somebody might be keeping a stone which is, let's say, 500 grams, but he is charging the customer for 1 kilogram. Okay, so that's how people get exploited. And Napoleon was very smart in analyzing this. So he fixed the things right there in business. He said, no, we will now use standardized weights and measurements, so that the exploitation of the common people doesn't happen. And these are some measures which won the hearts of the people, not only across France but outside France as well. Okay, so that is how things happened. So now these French armies, they were actually looked upon as harbingers of liberty, as the torch bearers of liberty. So the French army, which was basically made up by Napoleon, all across the world, or at least the countries which were close to France, they looked upon Napoleon as a savior and a messiah, and they thought that this French army will come and liberate them of their miseries. All the countries that were surrounding France were more or less going through the same phase of torture and same phase of misery as the people in France had. So Napoleon's the measures that Napoleon had taken basically was welcomed by everyone. Okay, although tables turn around at a later half of Napoleon's life, and he had to lose a battle and had to go in exile. Okay, he lost everything that he had made up, but the fact still remains that he was a valuable contributor to the roots of democracy. He implanted roots of democracy by being a dictator. Okay, that's the winning part of it. by being a dictator himself, he still planted the roots of democracy. Okay, so French army, they were looked upon as harbingers of liberty. Okay, now there were certain things which were gradually going against Napoleon. Okay, so he was expanding his empire. He was bringing in the Napoleon Code. Now understand this. Okay, the rules and laws that are applicable to India might not be applicable to Pakistan or might not be applicable to China, because different governments run their own countries in different ways based on the common perceptions that people have in those countries. So all of a sudden, if let's say a country A invades another country B, okay, so a country A invades another country B, and if the country A implements its laws in country B, however good these laws might be, but still the structure, the social structure of B might not be the same as the social structure of A. So there might be disputes. Okay, so just as let's say France had these 3 states, but do all countries had these 3 states? So if Napoleon is bringing up a law which abolishes these 3 states, maybe in a neighboring country you do not need this law because these 3 states never existed. However, in strictly implementing certain laws that were the code of Napoleon, certain countries, their people backfired. Okay, in those countries the political structure or the social structure was not the same as France's. Okay, and that's when things started going haywire. So although they looked upon Napoleon as their savior and Messiah, they were also going through miseries in bits and pieces, but they were not able to finally digest all these things that were there in the Napoleon Code. So a drift started. It slowly and steadily there was a drift that started. Okay, so that's how it goes. Okay, now what happens is Napoleon was in an expansion mode, so obviously he needed armies. So if you correlate, these things are very much similar to the imperialist British Empire that was there in India. Okay, since they were in an expansion mode, they needed money, and who are they going to get the money from? Obviously the common people. And these common people, how are they going to get the common money from the common people? Obviously by increasing the taxes. Okay, so increased taxation. So whichever countries Napoleon had conquered, on the people the taxes were imposed at a higher rate, because obviously he needed a lot of more of armies, arms and ammunition. He was in an expansion mode. So taxes were imposed, higher taxes were imposed, which again was one of the factors of dissatisfaction amongst countries which were governed by Napoleon. Okay, so there was also a strict censorship. What do you mean by censorship? Censorship basically means you must have heard about censorship, especially in movies. So whenever a movie is released, there is a censor board which either rejects or which either accepts the movie based on the content it is trying to display. Okay, so all these are basically censorship. So censor board makes it a point to go through the movie to look at its content, whether it is more vulgar or whether abusive content is there, or whether something is there which might instigate or communal violence. So all these things are looked upon, and only then the movie is given a consent to be released. Okay, right now these days we are going from a transition of watching movies in theaters to actually these websites, or rather we would say these series which are going on. We have Amazon, Netflix and all. So there's a transition that we are seeing. Okay, so people prefer to watch it in their houses rather than take the trouble of going to a hall to watch the same. Okay, so there is called censorship. This is called censorship. So there was strict censorship. Now how do you implement censorship here? So these newspapers which were published, so there was Napoleon ensured that there was strict censorship in these newspapers, so that the ideas against him cannot expand. Okay, people who used to give speeches, they were closely monitored. So this is called censorship. Okay, so Napoleon had a very effective management in censorship. Okay, forced conscription in French armies. Okay, again we can correlate this to the situation that happened in the British ruled India. So obviously there was a lot of requirement for forces, armed forces, and the only way in which they could get is forced recruitment of the armies from people of India. Okay, so these were things which turned the tables. Otherwise, the basic funda of the Napoleon Code was pretty much against the monarchical rule. It took a dictator to bring this to the world, and at the initial phase it was welcome, but during the later stages it was rejected, and people rose up in arms against Napoleon. Okay, so that's how the thing went. See, it's not easy. First of all, understand, whenever you are bringing a change in the ruling system, it's not easy that people will just, forget about the monarchical system and adopt democracy. Not everybody is going to buy into that idea. There's a huge population in every country, and the change doesn't happen all of a sudden. Okay, for example, if you look into India, the moment it gained freedom, was everything all fine? No. There was a lot of bloodshed that happened during partition. There was a lot of bloodshed that happened in including the princely states into the new country of India. So it's not an easy process. People will just not buy into a change just because it's a change. Okay, so people tend to look at results, and they have seen the monarchical rule for a very long time. However good and bad it is still a part of their lives. So it's easier to adjust a life which we have already lived than to explore something new. Okay, so that's the major mindset that all of us always have. Okay, so it's easier to buy into whatever has been happening and try to make some minor changes, okay, by being in the system rather than changing the system itself. Okay, so that's something that happens in all political situations across all political countries. So yes, if you look into the entire transition phase of Napoleon, there's a lot to, or rather France, there's a lot to learn. First, it was monarchical rule against which the people protested. Louis XVI was executed, and the monarchical rule was abolished. The Jacobean rule came into power. Again, Robespierre was also executed, and then the directory of 5 members came in. There were differences because of which it didn't prevail for a long time, and taking the advantage of the situation, Napoleon rose. So monarchy is again coming back to monarchy. Louis XVI and Napoleon both are monarchs. It's a hereditary monarch. Okay, it's basically a dynastical monarch, and this is a dictator monarch. Although both are monarchs. Okay, but Napoleon ensured that the code that he tried to implement, or rather implemented successfully in most of the parts of his empire, okay, the roots were there in democracy. So the reason why we try to understand Napoleon code, although it was a code which was presented by a dictator, is because somewhere down the line the reforms that he was trying to bring in were widely accepted as the roots of democracy even till now. Okay, so all these things that he actually abolished and all these things which he transformed were actually welcome. Okay, but somewhere down the line things go haywire. As I said, transition is always not and transitions like this, okay, transitions like this, they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of they might result in a lot of bloodshed as well. So none of the transitions have been smooth in history. All transitions have been difficult. For example, India being handed over the rule or freedom was not the end of our problems. We struggled till almost 1950 or maybe 1955, 1960. Then there was an economic problem, then there was famines, and the country was kind of going from one phase to another. Okay, today the life we see, the life was not like this in the 50s when India got freedom. Okay, so there was a lot of turmoil and changes and unrest, and there was a lot of starvation, and there was a lot of medical negligence. So all these things were there. Okay, so no rule has been smooth enough. No transition has ever been smooth enough. And at times, what people think is, okay, the British rule was better. Okay, so it's a very general conception. When they see that even after independence, the misery of people of India has not ended, so most of the Indians started thinking in this way, that the British rule was better. And that's when again there is a chance of we going back to the same mode. Okay, so this is what happened in France. Okay, so people realized that monarchical rule has to be overthrown, but when it was actually overthrown, they were not able to accommodate to the changes. So they needed a dictator who can throw upon these reforms which would have been bought by democracy itself. So the dictator emerged in the form of Napoleon. Okay, so it's a nice, interesting concept. Okay, the reason why we try to understand these things is because it's very much correlated to the human society as a whole. Okay, that's how the human society functions. Okay, it's not an individual society, it's a collective identity which we all are trying to work upon. Okay, so you can take a snapshot of the same.